So I want to begin, the theme of this panel, in addition to Chinese folklore, is business innovation and disruption in the business world and the worlds that all of you operate in. And I really wanted to focus us, as we leave today, on both the promise and perils of the future. And you all are involved in building the future and in trying to think about what it looks like. And really kind of wanted us to think about three things. What is the wild future that you all see in your different domains? What's the wildest future that maybe the rest of us don't see because we're not in your domains? What are the current problems of the world that this wild future might help us solve? And what are the new problems we expect will be created by the wild future? So let's begin at the beginning. And I want to ask each of you, just starting with Sheila and working down, to kind of briefly tell this audience one thing that you expect most people here don't know, that you may have had a glimpse of, that is part of the future that's coming, that you think might transform the world.
Sure. Thanks for having me. You know, when I think about the data, and many of you know, around the trends of senior care, the trends of the shortage of women participating in the workplace, and how that can help drive economies. A lot of data is out there. But I think some of the things that I think a lot about is the shortage of caregivers that's causing this crisis. And when we look at the economic trends as well as population trends, where there are many countries with low birth rates, there's going to be such a dependence on countries with high birth rates to actually support and care for those countries. And so for all the things that I know immigration's a hot topic. I was talking to, I think Vincent was in, he and I were in a disruptive medical care session together. And the reality is we're not gonna really have a choice down the road. And I actually think it's not picking political sides. It's the fact that if we don't have solutions to care for our families and solutions brought on by disruptive technologies like Care.com to find and scale solutions, we're really going to run into serious problems. And if we look at, just as an example of Japan, probably one of the most isolationist country in the world, the fact that they are thinking about robots for caregiving, they're thinking about opening their immigration for hundreds of years. They were so close to that, but they don't have a choice.
What do you think, if you look at this society where we are now, what do you think is the wildest thing that will be common practice 30 years from now, that if you told people now it'd be common practice, people would say, no way that's going to happen?
Well, it's
robots?
Well, no, it's actually so, if you think about it, okay? So 15 years ago, when people were looking for jobs, people said we would never go on the internet to go hire. And that's the first place we go to. Dating 10 years ago. God forbid I would find the love of my life online. And how many weddings do we go to now? And when we think about care, and when we think about Uber, or you think about all these marketplaces that are creating what I call meritocracy by using disruptive technology, freelancing. I mean, where we're headed is really opening up complete marketplaces for peer-to-peer solutions to make it much more efficient to solve our everyday problems. I mean, that's where it's headed, and so it's going to be beyond boundaries. We're not going to have a choice, and what we're doing is actually empowering sole proprietors, 20 million in this country alone already, and we're creating marketplaces that open it up to possibilities. I'm optimistic, actually, about the future.
Yeah. Well, Mark, why don't you follow us? What specific wild things that are going to astonish people in this room?
So I hope that in 10 or 20 years, the word cancer will switch from being a noun to a verb. So instead of having cancer, a patient would be cancering. And it becomes a manageable thing instead of a death sentence. And let me back up now and sort of go through some steps, I think, from where we are now and how we get there. So most people, I think, are well familiar with genomics, of course. Genomics, incredible science that's really exploded in the last 10 years, especially. incredible amount of information talking about the predisposition of diseases and matching drugs to patients probabilistically. But what's going to happen next, I think, for the next 10 years, in order to be able to start to manage disease states more effectively, is there'll be a new bow wave of interest. And after genomics, I think the world will start to look more at proteomics and start to look at the measurement and the management of proteins in order to manage disease. So if you think about, so again, the genomics will tell you what might happen to you. Proteins generally tell you what is happening to you. It's much more difficult to measure. But if you can, then you can actually pick up diseases you can identify a disease much earlier. And then you can also do very important things for the management of disease. So for example, a lot of times people would develop resistance to drugs, and you can measure that, you can manage that if you can measure proteins more effectively. You can also determine what dosage levels to have. And so as a net result of this, I hope that over the next 10 or 20 years, what will happen is instead of people receiving what oftentimes is indeed a death sentence, it becomes something which is more manageable, like diabetes is today, for example.
So we have robots massaging our aging parents. We have cancer becoming a verb. Joe, how are you gonna one up this? The wild future.
Well, these are the two important areas that I think will have a major impact in the future. But I think that I want to bring a historical perspective. I think in order to predict future, you have to look at past, particularly to technology revolution. So past 2 days, I managed to start a little bit about the industry revolution, which most of you probably know, but not that many of you probably doesn't know the second industry revolution, which happened in the second half of 19th century all the way to the First World War, where in the first stage of revolution, the technology advancement focused on the improvement and invention of steam engine and iron making, as well as textile industries. But in the second phase of industrial revolution, actually, the key word there is synergy. So the basic idea was already laid out there. But then in the second phase, you had the emergence of new industries such as steel making, such as infrastructures like skyscrapers and the steel bridges. You have new industries such as the chemical industry that's apparently not directly related to a steam engine, but nevertheless enjoyed a lot of synergies created by the simultaneous improvement of productivity in multiple industries, lowering costs of core materials and technologies. So I see a very striking parallel of the IT revolution, which started about 70 years ago from a single silicon chip. And what drives the revolution was really the Moore's law, right? The observation, or you can say, that the density of the transistor is going to double every 2 years. But we all know that Moore's law now sort of slowing down. Instead of doubling every 2 years, now we're seeing 3 years or even 4 years, because we're really reaching that limit. So we're looking for new ways to grow technology, and I clearly see that synergy as the defining characteristic for technology development going forward. Because if you take a robot, right, nothing of the robot is brand new. You basically have a computer chip sitting with a bunch of mechanical devices. It's really about how low can you drive the cost down so that it becomes available for everybody.
And what's something one specific thing that you think will be, again, commonplace when we gather here again 30 years from now that would be astonishing to people now?
I think just like the first industrial revolution sort of liberated people from a lot of the physical labor, right? I think the IT revolution sort of is working really hard to alleviate some of the mundane intellectual tasks. I think for the next few decades, we might be astonished by the fact that some of the very difficult problems everybody here trying to solve might be easily solved by robots. Then the fundamental astonishment is that what do we do as human race?
But the robot's also going to be busy massaging the old people, so you have to allocate our robots very carefully. Shamina, you think a lot about the world of money, and for those of us who are in Aspen and don't know a lot about money, help us think about what's the wild future of something seemingly quite stable like money.
Yeah. I think the future of money is actually going to be the future without money. That's the big That's the big prediction.
That's good news for writers.
Or at least money as we know it. Okay, so I think the future of money is going to be about breaking down barriers to access and increasing more people in, by geography, regardless of income, in the formal financial system. So, and this is true because the technology and the payment systems that we've all talked a little bit about up here reduces the friction between buying and selling goods. And that friction is cash. So when I talk about the future of money, and the future being without money, I mean cash will be gone. I can even say less than 30 years, you're not going to see cash. Because, again, with the tech advances, how you pay for money actually becomes a driver of equality of opportunity. So we're great here because we live in a place probably where we have access to digital payment solutions. So whether it's paying on the internet or using a credit card or using a debit card, 85% of the world's transactions are conducted in cash. And so when you conduct transactions in cash, you're much more susceptible, if you're living in an informal economy, to crime, corruption, violence. You don't have the protections that come with having something like a bank account. Think about that for a second. 2.5 billion people in the world, half of the adult population, operates in an economy that does not have access to formal financial systems. They operate in a cash economy. So the next time you're thinking about how easy it is for you to go online and book your travel to Aspen, or how easy it is to save your money and have a savings account and a checking account and this kind of account, think about the women in India and the women in Rwanda who are getting most of their money through social subsidies from their governments. And what we know right now is that by the time the government sends out a social subsidy, because they're operating in a cash economy, 40% of the subsidy disappears by the time it gets to the actual recipient. Because of all the middlemen, of all the little pieces of rupees or pesos or whatever that gets taken out. So Anand, my prediction, and I actually don't even think it's a prediction, I actually think it's a reality, it's happening a lot faster, is that the future of money is going to be a future without money.
So now let's shift gears. You've all sort of gotten into this already, but thinking about current problems that this future you're all working on might solve. Mark, Bioscale was involved in nanotechnology, this cracking the world of the very, very, very small. Can you tell me what kinds of things, what kinds of possibilities, solutions start to open up once you're able to get into the world of the very small? How does it change war? How does it change, you already talked about medicine, how does it change all variety of fields once we're able to work at that much smaller level?
Yeah. Well, if you just stay within the guardrails of biology for a second and think how it impacts other parts of society besides just medicine. First of all, there's going to be new techniques, new tools will be able to be more effective for food safety. There'll be battlefield diagnostics that can happen so that when a soldier goes down, you can on the spot diagnose them for if they're having traumatic head injury, for example. There's certain biomarkers when traumatic head injury happens. There's certain biomarkers that are thrown off, and if you can measure those quickly, then you know what type of situation that you're dealing with.
So you inject something into someone?
No. You take a sample of their blood, and in the blood there's about 100,000 different proteins that are swimming around, and there's a specific protein that's a marker for traumatic brain injury. And if you can measure that marker, and you know that the brain injury has happened, then you treat the patient in a certain way on the battlefield, for example. But within the world of medicine, it'll be fundamental in terms of things like companion diagnostics, being able to miniaturize technologies down so they could actually be in the doctor's office, and so that patients can actually have much better care at the bedside. There's a lot of innovations that nanotechnology is going to provide.
Yeah. Sheila, I want to go a little bit deeper in this question about flexible work. And a lot of times, maybe this is a personal irritation, but I don't like the association of flexible work with kind of women and motherhood exclusively, because there's actually a lot of reasons that people have. to not want to work the same amount as two people who live next door to them. Can you talk about how this kind of peer-to-peer thing, people being able to kind of sell their labor in a variety of ways, what else it might unleash? What other side projects besides motherhood it might unleash in the society?
I mean, it's already done it, obviously, for Uber and improving transportation. And so there are so many other freelance labor other than caregiving and not specifically associated with moms and motherhood. Lots of other professions that I think could, it's already happening in telemedicine when it comes to radiology. There's a lot of in-home sort of professions that are starting, and you're right, it's not just gender specific.
Why is it, what always surprises me is if I'm a very talented lawyer, which I'm not, it's actually very hard for me to sell 15 hours of my mind to the market every week. Why is it so hard in a very functional market society?
Well, previously, I think that technology was very difficult, and it was very costly to kind of build that kind of scale. And now, obviously, with lower costs of storing data and the ability to be able to serve up interfaces, mobile, desktop, anywhere in the world to access labor is now much more ubiquitous. So I think that that's helped, that lowers technology, but it's also what I started to say is so much of it is also consumer mindset and behavior to feel comfortable with the use of technologies because you're putting your profile and your life out there to sell your wares, which is the services that you provide.
It used to become a brand.
Right, and you're creating a brand. LinkedIn's doing a good job when they purchased Pulse, and it's now moved from just ego, how many links, to now, what do I stand for, and creating your own personal brand. I think they've done a great job of even moving that forward, even more prevalent for professionals than blogging. I think with what they did on sort of the homepage. My key concern, I know that was sort of your latter question, is so much investment is made in removing the middlemen, creating peer-to-peer, great opportunities. But it also results, I think, in loneliness, a lack of community. And this isn't just freelance moms working from home. It's something that I think we have to think about human interaction. I mean,
there's no water cooler in this world.
It's important. And I think, Marissa Mayer got such criticism around trying to bring people back, but yet there's debate around remote and creating culture and creating a sense of belonging for people. And we need to think about that with technology. At the same time, I think that robots is a topic that comes up in terms of...
I'm shocked to hear more about robots.
No, it's both something around the risk of human interaction. We think of our own children and how much they text. And we think about why do we have rules during the week of no computers and not texting, because we encourage face-to-face human interaction that we would like the next generation to actually value. And so you can imagine 20 or 30 years from now, what are sort of our rules of engagement when we have such this incredible peer-to-peer network and this dispersed, remote employee base? I mean, that's where it's headed. I mean, the rise of freelancing compared to corporate jobs, it's where it's headed.
Yeah.
But how do you create systems in which human interaction is still critical and important? And it's the same questions that we think and grapple with of going global, creating great access, but yet we prioritize local. We prioritize local farm and the organic, and why does community mean a lot to us?
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things that at least I think about, and how you can still use
the
disruptive technology for virtual water cooler.
Yeah. Joe, there are some people, perhaps even in this room, who don't think the lack of freedom in China is a problem, but let's stipulate that it is a problem. Do you think the Chinese aspiration to be innovative, to build innovative companies, to be an innovative superpower, perhaps, will collide with the lack of freedom and perhaps change it?
So I think that if you really think about disruption for the future, I think it's really not particular industry, but the way that we disrupt probably become dramatically different. This probably refers to how countries compete and how companies compete, right? So the pattern I see how companies are now competing is not purely by invention, but by borrowing wood, because the second phase of the industrial revolution is really an era of synergy. So I think if we are in the second phase of IT revolution, there's really about creating a synergy. You have great leaderships which are great synthesizers, being able to bring different aspects of the business and the part of the business that's disrupted by technology, and you ride on that rather than defending against yourself. But going back to your question, how countries compete, I think that it's related to your questions. I've been thinking about this, right? Because in agriculture society, what is the scarce resource? It's land. So back in a few thousand years ago, when people go into war, it's capturing land. And you go into industry revolution, back in 17th century, 18th century, it's all about hydrocarbon, right? Capturing more energy and more raw materials, and turning it into products. So what is really the scarce resource for the second phase of IT revolution? I don't think it's land. I don't think it's energy entirely. I actually think it's human capital. You need, before we invent robots that are smarter than us, we need really, really good talents to create them in the first place. So of course, we have to worry about how to
brains, ideas and brains.
Ideas and brains. So I think there will be a war in the future. I mean, as we discussed like yesterday or the day before yesterday about the striking similarity of 1914 and 2014. A striking, you have globalization, you're in the middle of a major technology revolution, but are there going to be a war? My answer, yes. But it's a different type of war. It's a war for talent, not a war for energy.
But because I have not forgotten my question, is there
yes,
is there a tension between that desire to be a country of ideas and brains and the lack of freedom?
Well, you look at U.S., right? U.S. benefit a lot from creating utopian for a lot of the smartest people in the world. They come into this country trying to build the American dream. So I think that's why the U.S. been winning that war, in the IT revolution or in the future, right? Because Elon Musk he was an immigrant. I'm an immigrant too. So I think that right now there are two ways to motivate really smart people, entrepreneurial people. One is, of course, economic return. China, for the past 3 years, ever since the open door policy and modernization, I think successfully did that. I was attracted by the opportunity as I went back to China to participate in the internet. Right? I think the other is lifestyle issues, such as quality of air. I mean, there's a lot of my colleagues and people I know are moving their family back to States because air is simply becoming unbearable in Beijing.
Not good for the brain.
Not good for brain development and for the kids as well, right? So I think there's multiple issues for the countries every country to consider.
But it sounds like freedom of thought and assembly are not things you worry about.
Well, for my business, we're not prohibited. We are allowed to compete. Actually, China Internet is one of the most competitive industry. I think competition really drive that industry going forward. That's why within a few months, you're going to have the biggest IPO in the human history. Alibaba is going to raise $15 billion, and so I think that says a lot about the nature of that business. But I think that the war for talent is definitely going to be equivalent of a war for hydrocarbons going forward.
Shamina, I wanted to ask you about banks and bankers, since there are none of them here, and we're speaking in privacy. There was I remember I met a great central banker, former central banker, who diagnosed the entire global financial crisis very simply. He said, for hundreds of years, banks understood that their purpose was to stand behind the people they financed and be means, not ends. Allow other people to do great things, and the banks helped you do those things. They were service providers to people who were doing things in the world. And at some point, banks forgot that, and they started to think of themselves as ends in themselves. Do you see that changing now as we kind of unwind from this crisis? And how do financial institutions think of the people they serve today, and how do you think it needs to change?
So I'm going to take a page, I think, from Joe's book and talk a little bit about financial inclusion. No, I'm just kidding. Dismiss your question. but actually, as part of that, I'm just kidding, Joe. Sorry, you've totally answered the question. What I was gonna, listen. I can give you my best thinking on that, which I can promise you is not going to be anything hugely philosophical. But I do want to put it in the context of the fact that MasterCard actually isn't a bank. And it's not a credit card company. So for all of you out there that think MasterCard is a credit card or a bank, it's not. It's the technology that connects a buyer with a seller with their banks. And it's sort of this distributed trust model, which I think is actually a very interesting topic that I've been thinking a lot about. But in terms of the banking, I did work at Citibank for 5 years, and I worked there during the financial crisis. And to the extent that I think it was a failure of a lot of things, including the regulatory environment and including the political environment. So it was a failure on the government and the private sector side, the banking side. Has there been a shift in the last 5 years in terms of culture, mentality? And Anand, I can't answer that. I mean, I think that it's what we're starting to see are, at least in the United States, is we're starting to see the fines and the penalties. So you're starting to see multi-billion-dollar fines hit banks, you know, like JP Morgan and Citi and things like that. So I think the story is still being written, quite frankly.
In the companies you interface with, do you see people's self-image changing of what a financier is for, what a financier does, what story they tell their children about what their purpose is?
I think, I don't think it's by industry, right? So I think I haven't noticed anything different between how a financier might talk to their children versus a politician might talk to their children. And maybe that's two wrongs don't make a right, but it's sort of like, I guess the teacher, I mean, it's sort of like in personal interaction, as one of our readings would say, who am I to judge?
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
To that? You know, we just took the company public in January, and I've gotten I developed a close relationship with our book runners and our lead bankers, and I've had these conversations with them, and in fact, I found that there is a desire actually to be part of the Aspen Institute, and I've spoken to Peter about this. There's a willingness to really do some self-reflection. And I was not, you know, I only took the company public. That's why I want to provide that caveat. I don't know, and I was not interfacing with this team that took us public 10 years ago. But the sense I get is there's a sense of humility and a sense of a real understanding. And it's also because they're serving clients that are more purposeful and are social entrepreneurs, and that's actually really inspiring them as well. So that's been sort of part of our conversation. So I just have this optimism of getting more of them to be part of the fellowship program to really understand what leadership is about that can make a meaningful difference in that industry.
Well, there's so much more I can ask you, but I don't want to steal the opportunity of others. So do you have questions for this great group? Very good questions.
This one is on the back.
There's one in the back that I can't see, but others can. There we go.
Good afternoon. My name is Femi. I wanted to ask whether, in fact, the incidence of crime and fraud won't just shift online. Because one of the points you made, I think, was that, look, okay, you're safer from sort of attacks when you carry physical cash. But by it going online, isn't there a different kind of fraud that one becomes vulnerable to, which I think society has to pay attention to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, fraud, like crime, will find its lowest point. So there are more people thinking about how to bust open a system than to save a system, quite frankly. So you're absolutely right in thinking that there will always be crime, there will always be fraud. And I think that's why there will always be a need for safety and security and soundness and the technology to make sure that whatever systems we're moving to are less able to be broken into. And so just a quick example. Does anybody remember those, the steering wheel on the car? You'd put that thing on the steering wheel of your car so that if somebody broke into your car, they couldn't, right? So that didn't really do jack in terms of like, you know, saving your car. But what it did was it made the robber look at your car and say, I'm not going to even mess with it. They've got this thing on the car. I'm going to go to Joe's car and take all of his money. Yeah. So I think that that's sort of a very simple analogy to what you're talking about, that we have to make things less vulnerable and more secure, but absolutely, there will always be crime.
Time for 2 more questions. Rebecca.
Hi. You've all had such great professional success. I was just wondering, stemming back to the Aspen Institute and programs that you've been involved with, how did the Aspen Institute, or did it affect any of the choices you made along the way in your decisions or your career paths?
Yeah. I guess, from my perspective, I'm Henry Crown Fellow Class of 17, and so halfway through the program right now. And definitely as a result, I think, of last year's session, the first session, started to make some career decisions, realizing I'd been running the same company for probably too long, and time to move on and use sort of entrepreneurial skills doing something else. And then also to start to reflect about what else needs to be done in the broader system or broader society, and how could one or many contribute to that. And personally, I've been very inspired about the project idea, and the specific project that I've started to take on. It's been refreshing. It's one of those things that helps you get up in the morning, frankly.
Anyone else want to take that on, or should we take another?
Well, Rebecca, I would say that I have, in many ways, I can't even describe the ways that the Aspen community are being involved with the Crown Fellowship and the global seminars and having mentors like, Keith and everybody else, how that's transformed me. But I will say that, so all of that is absolutely real and critical to my growth, I guess, as a professional, my growth as a human in this world. But I've had, as many of you all know, very ups and downs in my career and things like that, and I have consistently look to my Crown Fellows and my Aspen colleagues for guidance, very practical advice and guidance, but also confidence and strength, and have never been left wanting. So it's been a very personal experience, but also very professionally rewarding.
Last question. Very important. Ana Lopez.
Going back to the issue with cash being gone, I'm a little bit concerned how we are going to be prepared to handle all or help the people in rural areas who will not have access to the technology to do their transactions.
It's a great question, and it's actually your country and countries like Kenya and Egypt are actually leapfrogging countries like Europe and the United States around their ability to get rid of cash faster than anybody else. So if you look at somebody like M-Pesa in Kenya, where the vast majority of transactions are taking place phone to phone, completely electronic, that's happening, and it came about in Kenya. So when you think about rural economies and things like that, governments are moving towards cashless policies and financial inclusion strategies. And as they move to those policies, they are also working with private sector companies to build out the infrastructure and the technology that will allow people to transact. But the truth is, if you have a cell phone, and most people do nowadays, you can transact.
So I have 2 tasks remaining before I get to go home. The first is to invite you to thank this wonderful panel for their insights. Thank you, guys.